The March 11th, 2021 Transportation and Transit Commission meeting is called to order. First item on the agenda, or I should say second item, is public appearances for non-agenda items. Is anyone at the meeting or on the call, video call here, who's going to be speaking on a non-agenda item? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to number 3, the approval of the meeting minutes for February. Did the commission members have a chance to review the February minutes? Are there any corrections or additions?
I'll move to approve.
I just wanted to know, my first name has 2 R's instead of 1, but I know that's Darren, there's about 10 different ways to spell my first name, so no worries.
Nice. I'll get that updated.
No problem.
All right,
Darren. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve minutes.
I move to second.
I move approval of the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Item number 4 is we've got 3 review items tonight. 4A is the Fitchburg transit changes, needs and opportunities for the future. I will go to Andrew for some background on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. So we have 3 representatives from Metro Transit here tonight. We have Mick, Mike, and Drew. Do you guys just want to take a quick moment to kind of introduce yourself and what you guys do?
Sure, thanks. I'll start. I'm Mike Czechvala. I work for the Transportation Department, of which Metro is part.
And I'm Mick Roosh. I'm the Marketing and Customer Service Manager.
Yeah, I'm Drew Beck, the Planning and Scheduling Manager.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And so, we spoke, the last couple TTCs, we have been talking about transit. It's, hot topic, certainly with COVID shutting down some lines, lots of uncertainty with some ridership numbers and certainly cost changing. It's been kind of top of mind, so we want to keep that going. And so we thought we'd bring Metro Transit here for kind of 1 of 2 public meetings. We want to invite, folks to watch at home and ask questions. We'll also be having one next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Again, this is really just kind of a check-in of, we know we lost some lines. We had some reduced service during the pandemic. Some of those changes will continue. And we want to kind of, review kind of any effects that might have had on folks now, and then kind of talk about, I know that Metro is really kicking off their network study, so we want to kind of get that on top of everybody's mind from a network redesign and what Fitchburg residents can kind of do to help that process. So with that, I'll kind of kick it off. We have kind of a 4-parter here. As I described, I'll kind of be talking a little bit about I'll just pull up my screen here. So can you guys see that okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'll kind of be talking a little bit about the Fitchburg ride sharing pilot, and then Metro staff will be talking a little bit about kind of temporary changes, some of those changes that will be continuing, and then kind of a brief kind of preview into what the network redesign is all about. And so with that, kind of launching off. So for the Fitchburg ride sharing pilot, so this was before my time, but I've kind of gotten up to speed with some of the details, and feel free to weigh in on this, TTC members, if you have more details. But operated from October, we got the agreement signed October 2017. We started the cancellation process in early 19 and kind of finalized that by March 19. We did do an analysis of the ridership. During this analysis period, we saw on average about 113 rides per month. That kind of started out slow, kind of peaked in kind of summer, and then went back down. We saw 65 unique riders, but then 10 of those riders made up 75% of the total rides completed. And the average cost of the city per ride was about $8. Oh, chat. Oh, Yeah, and so I just kind of want to have a high level overview of kind of what the pilot was about. So you can see here, so there's a couple different formulations of ride sharing pilots. In our formulation, we really want to focus on existing transit stops and these 4 additional stops, that being McKee Farms Park, the Senior Center, McGaw Park, and the South Transfer Station. So basically, we modeled this on, there's kind of a one rate for folks if they were going from or to any of these points, and then additional $2 if the trip originated outside these points, or $2 if it ended outside these points. And then also with the fare model was any trips outside of the service boundary would be fully on that mileage cost would be fully on the user, because we didn't want to subsidize trips outside of this area. So with that, and like I said, there are a number of different ways you could do it. So this is kind of highly constrained. We want to make sure we are kind of complementing the existing metro transit system, and in doing so, we wanted to incentivize that and kind of offer service within that. But based on some rider feedback, we had some likes. Folks did like the option for transportation and being picked up at home. That it was available was good, and that was relatively inexpensive. The dislikes, unreliability. In some cases, the drivers didn't show up. They didn't recognize the vehicles, or the drivers weren't kept to use foul language in front of kids. And some of the recommendations. So obviously, we didn't have, staff had kind of struggle marketing it. We had, on the side of buses and at bus stops, but that was really only for existing users of Metro Transit. And we weren't really, pushing this to other folks. And some of the recommendations were, folks wanted flexible point-to-point transportation for work, medical appointments outside of Fitchburg, and shopping. And, certainly to the extent possible to kind of help seniors get to and from the senior center, and, get to and from other destinations around the city. So with that was kind of, a high level recap. I know that we had some uncertainty before, and certainly that 10% of 10 riders using 75% of services was not ideal. We also had, I think, kind of some misunderstanding with the vendor of kind of how we were going to charge for those trips outside of Fitchburg, and some of the kind of base versus like just a fixed mileage fee. So I think, there were plenty of lessons learned from that, but I just kind of want to offer, that was kind of this initial kind of pilot, and we learned some things from that. There are lots of different options for this, and that we can definitely, pursue in future meetings. But I just want to kind of give a recap, because I know we hadn't really touched that. Yeah. So with that, I want to hand it over to Mike with Metro Transit to talk a little bit more about Metro Transit routes.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Okay, so here we are. So Metro Transit is a City of Madison service. Metro contracts with surrounding communities like Fitchburg to provide service outside the City of Madison. Our website is there in case you didn't know, mymetrobus.com. This is our general fixed route bus network. We also have a paratransit system that complements that for people with disabilities. And so you can see it crosses jurisdictional lines. We serve Madison as well as Fitchburg, Middleton. We now have commuter service to Verona and Sun Prairie, and some pockets. We also serve, for example, we have some University of Wisconsin campus routes and things like that. So we have cut back our service significantly since the coronavirus pandemic about a year ago. I'm not going to go through all of this, but most of these routes are the commuter service, kind of the commuter overlay designed to provide capacity in the downtown commute-oriented flow of people into downtown in the morning and then back in the evening. So a lot of these higher number routes have been suspended, or in some cases reduced because of the reduced demand. for our service. This is a map showing the general location-based decline in service. So the red dots are stops that historically have had a lot of ridership, but have been reduced. So the size of the dot indicates the number of boardings at the bus stop, and then the color of the dot indicates how much it's declined between fall of 2019 and fall of 2020. So of course you can see a lot of the decline is in the downtown area, UW campus, of course being related to the fact that the UW has gone largely virtual, as well as a lot of people with downtown office jobs are working from home. But you can see these larger green dots here are our transfer points. So ridership has not declined heavily at our transfer points, and particularly kind of the core system of all-day routes that kind of serve the region and Madison area have not declined as much as the downtown commute. Just to point out that just because it's green doesn't mean it increased. It just means that it hasn't decreased as much. Our ridership, I don't know what the latest numbers are, but I think we were down to around 20% of what we've normally, the normal ridership. If Mick knows something, some numbers that are more up to date, he can feel free to chime in. We normally have service changes in August, and so I just like to point out that we do have a proposed service change that was just approved last night at the City of Madison's Transportation Commission. So there'll be a couple changes that we're planning in August. We will suspend routes 10 and 27, and then reinstate routes 28 and 38. That's a bit of a complicated story, and I'm not going to go into all of it because it mainly affects Madison and kind of the near east and near west neighborhoods in Madison. And then one thing that we're doing again in downtown is shifting routes 8, 12, 15, 70, and 72 from State Street to West Washington Avenue. And that's about how they get from the University of Wisconsin area to the Capitol Square. The main goal of that is to provide some additional capacity on State Street, as well as to help some of the businesses recover on State Street as more people are dining outside. And then with that, we were able to include some new bus lanes on West Washington. So in order to take advantage of those bus lanes on West Washington with a resurfacing project that's happening this summer. Route 81, just a super minor change. And really no changes in Fitchburg. The only change that has happened is the city of Verona and Epic have asked us to reduce the number of trips on Route 75, which does go through Fitchburg. So the transit network redesign, this is an exciting project that's coming up, and we're just kind of getting started. We had a public information meeting last week. The general goal, Metro Transit Network redesign will design a route system that will better meet the needs of Madison area residents and businesses. The goals are making service simpler, faster, higher ridership, reduced vehicle miles traveled, better service for underserviced and underserved and disadvantaged communities, and to complement the BRT system. So the bus rapid transit system is planned to come online in 2024. We know that we cannot simply drop that onto the network, that the existing network would be duplicative of bus rapid transit. And we want to not be duplicative. Instead, we want to complement BRT, but it's also an excuse to look at the entire network and really take a comprehensive review of the route structure and design it from a clean slate style of approach. The existing network is mainly designed around 4 transfer points. So we have bus routes that go between the transfer points, north, south, east, and west. And then a peripheral system that's mainly loops that serves the areas outside of the transfer point system, and then this purple kind of orbital network of routes that connects the transfer points around the outside, around the circumference of Madison, without going downtown. And then we have, on top of that, a commuter overlay network of peak-oriented routes that, again, are designed to reduce travel times for people coming into downtown during peak periods, and provide capacity on the busy corridors during rush hour. Like I said, a lot of that commuter overlay network has been reduced or suspended since the pandemic, and the reduced capacity reduced demand for people going downtown at rush hour. Historically, we had about 450,000 annual bus service hours before COVID. That's been reduced to about roughly 80 or 85% of that normal number. Existing bus network is very complicated. Metro has a lot of overlapping routes. Different routes operate at different times of day. Different routes operate at different times of the week. Sometimes routes go one way and sometimes they go a different way. So you have to kind of look at the schedules and figure it all out. Generally, no routes run every 15 minutes or better throughout the day. And so the goal is to kind of clean this up and make it easier to comprehend, easier to use, faster, and more frequent. This is the planned bus rapid transit network. And the main BRT line with the bus lanes and the signal priority and the BRT stations will be this blue east-west line that goes from the Westtown area through downtown, the University Avenue corridor, East Washington Avenue, out to Madison College and Easttown. And then with that, we'll also be branding two other routes as bus rapid transit. And that's the yellow line for now we're calling it BRTB, and then this green line for now we're just calling it BRTC. We don't know exactly how those two other BRT branded routes will be designed outside of the BRT system, but as they travel through the BRT network, they will use the bus lanes and use the BRT stations. And so part of the goal of the transit network redesign is to figure out exactly how these yellow and green lines will operate. For now, we're assuming that the green line on Park Street will go down to the south transfer point. We may not have transfer points after the transit network redesign. We're looking at, like I said, it's kind of a clean slate approach. And so we're really looking at putting a transit network together from scratch. So a big part of what we have our consultant looking at, Jarrett Walker and Associates, is this concept of access. And so the idea is, if you're a normal person living in your house or apartment or wherever you live, how far can you go in a given amount of time? So 45 minutes is often used as a reasonable travel time to go to work or do something. And so, the idea is you have all these potential jobs, grocery stores, retail stores, and other things that you could potentially want to get to. And the ones that are beyond a reasonable 45-minute bus ride away are kind of not within your circle of access. And so this is what the access map looks like in the Madison area for the metro system. Each of these hexagons are, if you live in one of those hexagons, how many jobs, this is jobs specifically, how many jobs can you get to in 45 minutes? Jobs are very easy to measure because we have pretty good job data, and a lot of people use the metro system to get to work. So one thing that you do notice is inside the transfer point system, the access is pretty good. Outside the transfer point system, it does decline significantly. And so, one of the measures of success is being able to improve this concept of access for people so that they can access more jobs and more things that people use in their lives. Frequency is important. I think a lot of people don't really think about the value of frequency for transit. So frequency is how often the bus comes. And frequency is really related to speed and freedom and the ability to get farther in a given amount of time. So for example, if the bus comes once an hour, that means on average you're waiting a half an hour for the bus. You may be waiting up to an hour for the bus. And maybe you're waiting in the comfort of your own home, and maybe you're waiting at work, but regardless, you're still waiting. If you need to get to work at 8 a.m. and the bus gets you there at 7:15 and it runs every hour, you're waiting for 45 minutes. And so if more buses come more often, you're waiting less, and that means there are more things that you can access. There's more jobs that you can access. The concept of coverage is also important. So coverage is the idea of how many people are served by transit, how many jobs are served by transit, regardless of frequency, but just how many people are within, for example, a quarter mile of transit. A lot of people rely on transit and they need some form of transit to access jobs and grocery stores and other things that they need. And so when we frequently measure how many people are within walking distance of transit. So the basic challenge here is that these things are competing goals. You can't have frequency and frequency at the same time, given that we have a fixed amount of resources, and so it's a trade-off. Again, we have if you want to measure it as roughly 450,000 annual bus service hours without an increase in budget. That's the resources that you have to work with, and so you have to kind of make these trade-offs and choices. And so it's not a matter of just advocating for more, although more is always better, and we do try to advocate for more in some cases. It's also trying to plan smartly with the resources that you have to make the to get the most utility out of those resources. Some other choices and trade-offs: infrequent one-seat rides versus frequent routes with transfers. So a lot of people, they don't like transferring, but if you do have a system that has has fewer routes with more transfers, it's easier to use and you get more frequent service. Higher levels of service during peak periods or consistent service levels throughout the day and week. So in the past, before COVID, Metro had more than twice as many buses in service during the peak periods than it did in the middle of the day and weekdays, and even less buses in service on weekends. So we had over 120 buses in service on the main line numbered routes. But then at noon in the middle of the day, it dropped down to, I think, slightly over 60. And then on weekends, I think it was in the 30s. So, most of the time our buses were in the garage not being used. And as we learn more about what the post-COVID world is going to look like, if more people are working from home and the peak period downtown-based 9 to 5 commute or 8 to 5 commute is not as demand-driven as it was in the past, perhaps we can redeploy some of those service hours and get more frequent service during the middle of the day and on evenings and weekends. And then another trade-off: fast direct service or routes with deviations and shorter walks. So people don't like to walk very far to transit, but if they are willing to walk a little bit farther, generally we can keep the bus routes on the main corridors. We can have them drive in straight lines. We can have service that's faster and more attractive. Some other considerations: the street network, freeways and cul-de-sacs are not conducive to planning good bus routes, but that's the street network that we have. Residential density is of course important. Job density is important. Walkability, equity, demographics, existing ridership and travel patterns. So that's a summary. I'd like to go through the schedule just quickly. I don't like to spend too much time on process, but right now we're kind of wrapping up phase 1. which is culminated with the choices report, which is on our website. I'll share a link to that in a minute, but it's basically a look at the existing conditions and the existing network and kind of laying out these choices and priorities and trade-offs that I've just kind of talked about. We'll be entering phase 2, which is looking at alternatives. We've tasked our consultant with developing 3 to 4 alternative transit networks, which will then compare with each other. And then in phase 3, we'll come up with a final network, which will be a plan that will be implemented later by staff. The implementation will happen by fall of 2023. Again, usually we make major service changes in August. So in this timeline, we could make some changes in August of 2022, and we'll probably try to make some of those changes in 22, but we're trying to get the entire system put together in 23. So BRT comes online in 24. So the main goal would be to put in kind of the BRT network using regular buses and regular metro stops. And then when construction's finished in 2024, we would simply replace the bus stops and standard metro buses with the BRT buses and the BRT stations. But the routes would essentially be already put together. So this is our website, mymetrobus.com/redesign. You can find some of the presentations or the presentation for phase 1, which was about a week ago. The choices report is available on the website. So I think that's all I had to go through. I'm going to stop sharing and we can go in any direction you'd like, comments or questions, however we'd like to go.
I can follow up, Mike. I looked up the ridership for you for 2019. We had 12.8 million rides. And actually in 2020 with the pandemic, we only had 4.7 million rides. So it's quite a decrease.
It dropped by maybe 70% or something.
Yep.
Do you know what the Fitchburg ridership was?
We don't. We could find it. We normally do aggregate bus stops by bus stop. We also have it by route. So pretty much every time somebody gets on a bus, we know the bus number, the route, the time of day, and that. So we can come up with something, but I don't have anything at the tip of my fingers. We do know that again the commute has really the downtown commute has really dried up, but some of that peripheral or just sort of the all day has stayed has not decreased as much.
Question.
I can find something and get back to get back.
I do have the report. I can send it to everyone, or Andrew, I can send it to you after the meeting.
I had a question. Just curious, when you're mapping out job density and resident density and all those other variables, what is the size of the area you're looking at? Is it, what are the boundaries of the area that you're dealing with?
In those hexagons. Sorry.
Yeah, those are arbitrary hexagons that have to do with access. But let me share the choices report here. There's a little more content here for you. So let's see. I forget if they used traffic analysis zones or if they used block groups for the demographics.
No, my question is, what is the total area that you're dealing with? In other words, do you have some kind of a perimeter you draw that you're doing this within? It's not just the city of Madison, is it all of Dane County? What is the scope of this?
Oh, yeah, so it's generally our service area, which could grow or could shrink. But yeah, generally we're tasking them with looking at our existing network of routes, so in our existing service area. But you know, that being said, we could look beyond it, and we could expand or contract service.
But just to, yeah, just to get to my point, I assume Fitchburg is within that area, and that Fitchburg is treated neighborhoods are treated the same analytically as any other neighborhood in the whole
Yes.
system.
Mhm. Yeah, so they're not really looking at municipal boundaries other than how they relate to, the putting the system together and who funds the service and that kind of thing. But from their perspective, doing this kind of analysis, I think this is residential density. They're looking at the service area as a whole.
Yeah.
Rather than breaking it up and looking at Fitchburg and Madison separately. I'm going to go to the ridership map here just to see if we can. Fitchburg. Bear with me. Yeah, so this red arrow, and I know Allied Drive is in Madison, but this general area has not declined very much. This I guess northeast Fitchburg seems like it's not declined too much. I'm not exactly sure where the boundaries are here, but this Vitrona area looks like it's held up pretty decently.
Okay.
Some significant declines over there. I think that's Madison.
Curious if you could just comment on paratransit and how frequently that's used. I just feel like people that don't necessarily experience disability don't know what that looks like and how Madison Metro accommodates people with mobility issues.
Sure. Yeah. So paratransit is the accessible component of Metro. So if you have a disability, you would register with Metro Paratransit, and then you would be able to book a ride at least the day before. And then they would generally provide door-to-door service with a van. We do some of our so we generally contract with private providers to do our paratransit. We do all of our fixed route bus with our own buses and our own drivers.
And Mike, is that a consideration with the network redesign of those having to be 3/4 of a mile outside of a buffer around those routes? Is that a consideration?
So the area there's a service area that's eligible for paratransit, and it's as Andrew suggested, it's a 3/4 of a mile boundary around the fixed route transit that has generally all-day service. And so if the fixed route bus is running on that day at that time, then you're eligible for paratransit. So we have some pockets that are a little weird. If they don't have weekend service or something like that, then they wouldn't have paratransit service on the weekend. But it comes into play if we were to say shrink or expand our all-day bus network, then the paratransit boundary would shrink or expand with it. So the paratransit area it goes with the fixed route network.
So if you were,
and so there's some cost considerations. Go ahead.
If you reduced the line or completely eliminated the line, that means you would also eliminate access to paratransit along that line.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And
Yeah,
do you keep statistics about paratransit? Like, do we have a sense could we find out how many people use paratransit in the city of Fitchburg?
Yeah, we can. I don't have that on the tip of my fingers. I usually deal with the fixed route system, but we do when somebody books a ride, we have all that information.
Okay, yeah, I don't think we need it now, but I'm just curious if it's something that we could have access to.
Yeah, we can get those kinds of numbers for you. Yep.
Could you explain why, if you eliminate a line, you eliminate the paratransit along with it? What's the reasoning behind that?
So paratransit is considered an accessible accessory to the mainline fixed route bus system. So if you're not able to ride fixed route bus, then you're eligible for paratransit. And so if the fixed route bus does not serve that area, then paratransit does not go with it. And so that's a fairly strict. Those two are the two are tied pretty intimately together.
And I'd like to add that what we do is we follow the kind of the federal ADA guidance on this, and they consider paratransit complementary kind of to the all-day fixed route service, if that makes sense.
I was just wondering, because if they're taking paratransit door to door and not riding the fixed route, I was wondering why the two were connected, but.
Yeah, and it's for people who aren't able to access the fixed routes.
Mike, on the bus rapid transit, you mentioned the yellow and green line as possible options. Is there a chance those would come online at the same time as the other line that's going to come online? You said 2024, I believe.
Yep, 2024 is our goal. And yes, those will all come online at the same time. And actually, the service will be there before the buses and the bus lanes and the stations. So yeah, they'll all come online at the same time, and then here it is. So they'll all come online at the same time, but these dashed portions outside the BRT running way will be just a standard bus operating environment in mixed traffic, serving normal bus stops. So once the blue line is completed, we'll start planning for probably the north-south line so that we can install the bus lanes and build the BRT stations on the north-south line. And that, you know, who knows when that could be done, but it's the east-west line is a $160 million project. So, you know, it wouldn't be, I mean, I would guess the earliest maybe in the 2030 range. That's planned to be electric BRT buses that share the BRT corridor on the isthmus and would operate every 15 minutes. So a lot of the benefits of BRT will come online right away.
For people watching, I just wanted to also just have you confirm that the bus rapid transit does not currently go into Fitchburg, and therefore the cost of bus rapid transit is not falling to Fitchburg.
Correct.
As a result, it doesn't serve Fitchburg, so we don't pay for bus rapid transit.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we're still planning this. We're planning this north-south line. Right now, our assumption is that it would end at the south transfer point, but that's not set in stone.
So there would actually be an opportunity to have a conversation about it going into.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, awesome.
And Mike, as you mentioned, the transfer points might not be there after the network redesign. There's a chance for that, though. You know.
Yep. The transfer point system was installed in 1998. It has some benefits in that it provides connections for these peripheral routes so that people making peripheral trips around the city don't have to make random transfers on street corners or go downtown and transfer and come back out. But it also introduces a lot of delay for people who live beyond the transfer point system and go downtown. So there's some pros and cons, but we're definitely going to look at some options that don't have transfer points and just have the buses continuing on.
To that point, Mike, are you guys, is the plan to have a couple different kind of alternatives for kind of residents to weigh in on at a certain point? Like,
Yep,
like in
yep.
phase two?
Yeah, so in phase two, we've tasked our consultants with coming up with 3 transit network alternatives and potentially a 4th alternative. And so those will be, you will be able to weigh in on those. We'll have more public meetings, and we'll have that on our website. And they should kind of have treat the trade-offs in different ways. So you'll be able to kind of compare and contrast, and ultimately we'll blend and mix the alternatives to come up with a final plan and recommendation.
Awesome. Any more questions for any of our Metro staff?
I'd just like to mention too that I know that there might be some on the call or at the meeting that you can feel free to ask questions. I know most of the questions have been coming from the commission members, but since this is considered a public meeting, you can ask questions. Just want to make sure everybody's clear on that before we let the Metro staff go.
Right. With that, I will share my screen real fast just to kind of get this last slide. So as Mike mentioned, you can go online and kind of check out their redesign here at mymetrobus.com/redesign. I hope I got that right. Let me know if I didn't.
Yep.
And also on the Fitchburg website, we do have a public transportation services page. If you didn't know, we have it updated now, so new, fresh information. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be having another public meeting, separate from the TTC, on Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. just for folks who couldn't make it tonight. Same content, but just definitely another chance to ask questions if you didn't get a chance to meet tonight and you're watching at home. We'd love to hear more from you. And then, yeah, certainly, if you guys want to talk a little bit more, I know you guys have a survey coming up as part of your redesign effort. So, and we will also have a survey online for Fitchburg residents, kind of 2 different flavors, metro area scale versus Fitchburg scale. So, do you guys want to touch on that at all?
Sure. Yeah, we're putting our survey together, so we'll have a survey out soon that will let you weigh in on some of those choices and priorities and trade-offs that I talked about. Available on our website.
Awesome.
I see that Randy would like to speak or ask a question. Go ahead, Randy.
Yes. Mike, thank you for your presentation and the others as well. I've seen the portion a couple weeks ago. I was able to view it since I'm on the Madison Transportation Policy and Planning Board, and that Jarrett Walker presented. Now, at that time, what we were looking at, I can't remember if it was the executive summary or if it was the full report. Is the full report out there on the website as well?
It just got posted today. Yep. So the executive summary is what you looked at, and the full report is now available on the website. Yep.
Okay, very good. And then as far as the statistics you spoke of, as far as ridership in Pittsburgh in particular, I mean, you mentioned a 70% drop. I think, Mike, you mentioned that. Or Mick, how will we get that information, or will I just reach out to Alder Gerhardt? And I'm curious as to those numbers as well.
I'll get that together, and I can send it over to Andrew if you'd like to read that.
Okay. And Andrew, you forward it on to.
Yeah. And Metro does a great job of kind of providing the year-over-year kind of comparison, 2019 to 2020, 2020 to 2021. So I can definitely send that your way as well.
Okay, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
That count regularly, so that's very helpful.
Great information. Great.
If we can get some,
Thank you very much.
I could also share it at council, so all the council at least have some access to the numbers, and we can have a small presentation to this effect. And that may be what I'll plan to do for our next council meeting, is present some of these numbers that we get together about Fitchburg specifically.
Yeah, that'd be great. Great information. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, with that, thank you guys so much. Oh,
Can I say
Mickey, you got one more thing? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, for people watching at home, we have text and email alerts for the network redesign. So if you go to our website at mymetrobus.com/alerts, or if you go to the network redesign page, you can sign up for those. And then we'll send out notices, like the survey, we'll put it out in that, and we'll put out a lot information in all sorts of other ways, but text and email alerts are a way to get it to you personally.
Awesome. Thanks again, Metro staff. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks a
Have a
lot.
great night.
Okay, moving on to the next review item, 4B, the West Lacey Road, Fitchburg Road to Seminole Highway reconstruction. I'll go back to Andrew for some background on that.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So as we mentioned last time, we had 2 public meetings in between our last GTC and this one. The first being Lacey Road. And I was just going to kind of do 3 things for each public meeting, just kind of really quickly, like, fast run through the presentation, just give you guys a quick synopsis of it. We have the recording out there if you really want to watch it. You have to, of course, put up with me. But there's a lot of great information there, a lot of great questions that were asked. I will kind of start doing a summary of kind of what we've gotten so far from the public, and then I'll close with kind of what the next steps are. So this is just kind of a check-in, no decision making at this point, but I know that there's a lot of folks involved in this, and want to make sure that you guys are apprised of kind of where we're at. So with that, I will share my screen. So this is the Lacey Road presentation, and so like I said, real quick overview. So there's kind of 3 projects in one. I kind of described 2 projects initially. So there is the kind of Pro Mega portion of this project that kind of started the developer agreement and why they're involved, kind of the design team. Then that's kind of this first big, roadway project, as we're calling it, that extends almost to Fitchburg, but does not include Fitchburg. That will be done in, I think, 2024. And then we also have this intersection project, which the design hasn't started yet, and we are including some public meetings on it. But we did want to wait and have folks weigh in on the control of that and the Badger State Trail, while we were talking about the rest of the project, because they do seem very much linked, and they are very much linked. So we went through kind of these elements, project goals, the schedule, the preliminary design, and I'll kind of skip down to the cross sections. And so this is kind of the cross section. So in a lot of places we won't have medians. And then in kind of the majority of the corridor, we do have medians, and they kind of, primarily shadow left turn lanes and pedestrian refuge islands. Their justification was really, slow down traffic, channelize future development if it comes online, to kind of, remove too many conflict points and accesses, and then be those pedestrian refuge islands. The kind of ancillary benefit we're getting from them is that they break up the 2 lanes of traffic, and therefore we can kind of make up some of the grade in some of the trickier spots where we have, large slopes. So that was kind of the justification on the medians. With that, and also just kind of, a helpful, so with the medians comes a 20-foot clear requirement from fire code. So in those areas, we definitely have to, have 20 feet of pavement for fire apparatus to be able to set up their vehicles. And then also we wanted to provide, our pedestrian bicycle plan in 2017, recommends buffered bike lanes on this type of facility. So we wanted to include those in the original design. There is an existing path by Quarry Vista. We wanted to include that as kind of an extra element. And, as we've been kind of working with the public, we got a bunch of questions from some folks who attended the meeting, and we've been kind of working through that. And one of the elements that we've been talking a little bit about is there is TID funding in this project. There's also a T grant from the state of Wisconsin to offer kind of some of these additional elements that are beyond just a reconstruction project. So that, really try to, urbanize this corridor and add street trees, add street lights, add some of these bicycle and pedestrian amenities and the median. So with that, I know there's a lot of question about like, do we need both, and what kind of elements are strictly necessary? What's the additional cost? We're certainly working through those questions with the public. And I know there's certainly concern with the trees along several places in the corridor. So there's a lot of existing trees in this area. There's also some existing oaks, along the current cross section. So we want to preserve as much of that as possible during kind of the transition of project leadership. We didn't get that tree survey going earlier, but now we have it going. We have a contractor doing that, so that should be taking place in the next couple of weeks. That was definitely a big concern from folks, and we heard that and wanted to get that going. So we'll have trees inventory, their type, their size, what could be moved, the relative value of those, and then we'll have kind of some sensitivity analysis. So that's kind of what we heard so far. Certainly some concern about redundant project elements, and that overall width and cost have been kind of primary concerns. If you guys have any kind of questions with that, otherwise I can definitely go into kind of the next steps.
Just a really quick minor question. What does buffered bike lane mean?
Yeah, yep. I'll go back up to. So you can kind of see here, it's not great, but the buffer here is a 2-foot painted buffer in between the vehicle travel lanes and the bike lane. So this would just be 2 feet of a white stripe on either side, potentially with cross hatching. That would just give a little bit of space in between the vehicle lane and the bicycle lane. And we don't have street lights on here, but they will be included as part of the project as well.
And which side are we looking, east or west in this?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, the bicycle path will be on the north side, so you're looking west in these cases.
And then on the left, that's just a narrow pedestrian path?
Yep, this is a 5-foot sidewalk. And so, yeah, looking at the corridor, so I'll just kind of zoom in on a couple different intersections. So you can see here with the medians providing pedestrian refuge islands, we're not stopping Rock Ridge, but that, folks can still get across kind of in that 2-stage crossing. So that's primarily one of the big benefits of raised medians, that, pedestrians can cross one kind of conflict at a time. From the sidewalk and some of the southern properties to the multi-use path on the north side. You can kind of see,
I know that one of the concerns, some people are concerned about the cost of this. I've seen comments, and some people wonder about the need for the multi-use path in addition to bike paths. Who are the multi-users besides? I mean, if there won't be bikes on it, who's on that thing?
Yep, it'd be bikes and pedestrians. I mean, that's primarily scooter users, segways, but yeah, primarily what we're talking about is pedestrians and bicycles.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. Certainly, in space constrained areas, we often, struggle with even getting any bike facility on. So the fact that we're talking about 2 is a great deal. But we are talking about kind of different users. I know there's a lot said kind of back and forth of, what percentage. I wish I had data on that. That would be amazing to kind of have bike facility versus kind of the path of. But to be honest, I think we're still building out the network. We don't really know, what percentage we're going to be building for. So I would just kind of keep that in mind. Even if we're not seeing folks right now on street facilities, that doesn't kind of preclude the fact that they could be using them later once we get this, street network built out. So, to the extent I would love that data, and I think that's a great point, and certainly something for us to consider. Some of the next steps that we're looking at doing is getting a smaller group. It was definitely my fault to kind of throw this on the public and through a shorter notice. And so we wanted to work through it a little bit more with some, residents on the corridor and business owners to kind of understand, what some of the, as I mentioned, there's a lot of nuance with this of like interdependencies. So, it's not a blanket of, oh, we can take that, we can't take that, so we need some time to work through that. And I think it would work better in a smaller group setting. So so if folks are interested, if they're out there, and, feel free to email me. email your alders and try to, we would like it to be representative of the folks who use this corridor, who live on the corridor. And, that will also be true of Cyene. We like to kind of get that smaller group. I wish we could do it in a public meeting like we used to, with smaller groups and get kind of back and forth. With that not being an option as it is, we'd like to at least get something that mimics that. So that's kind of our next steps in terms of getting that group kind of formalized and get some reoccurring meetings to work through some of these project elements. And just kind of walking down the corridor a little bit more, you can kind of see a few. We're not talking about any control at Commerce Park, but with left turn and right turn lanes, so that through traffic doesn't have to slow down. You can see that pedestrian refuge island, and then kind of medianization. And so we're not talking about medians the whole length. It's just kind of spots, and then in some places a little bit longer. And then we do have these left turns for kind of future development on the south side of Lacey Road on the O'Brien property. So with that, and I know there's 1,000 other project elements, so feel free. I'm sure I'm missing a lot. There's stormwater facilities, there's water, sewer. So feel free, to ask questions. And some of this information is certainly included on the project website, and some of it is included in our presentation materials. So, any other questions on this one before I move
Yeah,
on?
this is Rich.
Yeah.
Quick question. You mentioned site lighting or lighting. Is that going to be dark sky compliant since that's sort of a rural area?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we haven't gotten into the design specifically of that, but yeah, I definitely think we're very sensitive to trying to make sure we're not, we're only lighting what we need to near intersections and making sure those are dimmable and have shades on them.
I see that. Go ahead.
This is Troy. What's the traffic expectation on that road? Is it going to be increasing steadily as neighborhoods are built fill out to the north there and to the south?
Yeah, so we did get some forecast from the MPO last year, and what I can remember is that I think we're looking at I think it was roughly 6,000. So we got counts done by Seminole Highway in Lacey right before the pandemic. They kind of factored us up. We weren't able to get counts after that to kind of verify that, but that we factored those volumes up, and then we got growth rates based upon assumed development from the MPO. And I think I want to say in 2040 we're looking at about 8,000 vehicles per day along the stretch. So so that is there's considerable growth in the short term, but compared to what it is right now with roughly 6,000. But
I see that Jason and Randy both have questions for you, Andrew.
Oh, awesome. Sorry, I should expand this. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Two quick questions. The first one is the lighting plan to go along the whole length of the project?
That's a good question. We haven't gotten into it specifically yet. That's kind of one of the last elements. So yeah, and we didn't really bring it up during the presentation. I know in other meetings it has been a concern about the frequency. So that is certainly something we want the folks to weigh in on. And if you guys have any comments on that from a frequency standpoint.
And then my other question is, there's only like 3 major roads that go east and west through Fitchburg, McKee, Lacey, and Highway M. As this grows, is this going to be sufficient to handle the increase in traffic? Or is this going to have to be redesigned in 20 years?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned, we're looking at 8,000 vehicles roughly per day, and in 2040 is what the current MPO forecast is. I will verify that and get back to you guys if that's different. I'll note that a 2-lane road with left turn bays roughly, back in the napkin you could expect 18,000 to handle that. So certainly the roadway segment itself can handle a much higher capacity. Typically we see the capacity constraints at intersections. So we don't have any control proposed along this corridor in between Seminole and Fitzroy to actually stop Lacey. And so really we're like looking at capacity constraints at Seminole and at Fitzroy. So, and you know, what we mentioned in the meeting was the two alternatives we're looking at, roundabout and signalized intersection, have more than enough capacity to handle what the projected volume is through 2040. I don't yet know. We haven't really gotten down to Fitzroy because that's a future project for next year. But you know, that will be the same discussion of what capacity can that intersection handle, because that's, you know, where conflicts are. That's where we have congestion. So yeah, certainly this cross section should handle traffic for the foreseeable future. It's really a matter of what the community wants as far as amenities. You know, we have TID funding, we have federal grant, or we have state grants. You know, what can we, you know, what's the optimal corridor out here for residents and users along it? Randy, do you have a question?
I do, Andrew. Thank you. Back to the buffer zone is, you know, there's a lot of inconsistency, at least through while I'm driving, of a buffer zone. There's some even portions of Lacey have a buffer zone, and then the new portion does, the older portion does not. Is there a standard, or is there any state or federal regulations of it that we must have a buffer zone? Or is that just a standard that's being set going forward?
Right. So certainly not that you must have a buffer zone. I think, you know, if there's any standards, it would be on the width of the bike lane, you know, the bike lane itself. The buffer zone, it wouldn't really be effective any less than 1.5 feet. You know, at that point, the two stripes are right next to each other. You know, it doesn't really help. So typically we like to do 1 foot or 2 to 3 feet. But no, I mean, there's not really any guidelines on that. We have some specificity in our 2017 bike and ped plan, and that's where it specifies, you know, it recommends to have buffered bike lanes, the 4 foot bike lane with the 2 foot buffer in that for a 35-mile-an-hour road, 2 lanes with ADT of 5,000 to 10,000. And then once you get past that 10,000 volume, we actually have a recommendation to also include a shared use path in addition to buffered bike lanes. So that's going to be more, and so we'd be getting close to that kind of by the design year in this condition, and that's kind of why we felt like it was still okay to include both. Certainly with Cyan, we will be, you know, getting into that, so that's kind of the rationale for why we're including them a little more strongly. Just you know, consistency with our approved plans.
Good. All right, thank you very much.
Yep. Awesome. Sue, I think you had a comment that you want to share, right?
Well, I have a question, or a question and a comment, but just referring back to an earlier question by Mr. Horns, I think it was about having a bike lane on the road and then the paved path, the multi-use path. Just wanted to point out that the paved path already exists on the north side of Lacey, close to where the development is, close to Fitzroy Road. And the advantage of having a multi-use paved path is it leads all the way in and could continue on to the schools on Lacey Road. So their parents aren't going to want their kids bicycling on the next to traffic when they have the option of being on the shared path. It's just something we've talked about a little bit in Parks and Recreation Commission, because once those are installed, the parks system staff plows them. And we've looked at various important connections that I'm sure Andrew has ahead of us, identified where those paths are useful. And then I just want to clarify, you mentioned, Andrew, something about Fitzroy next year. Were you talking about the intersection of Fitzroy and Lacey, or the entirety of Fitzroy Road itself?
Yeah, I believe in 2023 we're starting to design the intersection of Fitzroy
Okay.
Road.
All right.
I'm not sure I don't want to misspeak. I know I got Seminole messed up too. I don't want to misspeak about the rest of that intersect or
Yeah.
roadway up to Nesbitt.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was it. The other, just, I know you've said it a couple times, but where is it recommended to have the buffered bike lanes alongside traffic? You talked about why it was there in here. It's recommended in some document you were referring to. What's the document? Because I didn't.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. So I found it in the appendix of the 2017 Fitchburg Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan.
So part of the comprehensive plan?
I believe it's a separate planning document. I could be wrong
It
about
is
that.
separate.
Yep.
Pardon me?
It is a separate doc.
Okay, so it's the Fitchburg.
Yeah, Pittsburgh Pedestrian and Bicycle Plan, the
Okay.
2017 update. Yeah, and in that appendix we have some recommended bike facilities by a couple different dimensions of roadways. So yeah, I mean certainly on the bubble, and there's kind of interpretation of that, but we're trying to we have a good shot at this to get it done. We want to do it right for the cities, but we're still trying to figure out what right for the city is. So
Yes. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
yep, no problem. All right. Any other questions on Lacey? Otherwise, I can move on to Sain.
I would just add about the buffered bike lanes and bike trail along the road. There's some guidelines too that goes into the League of American Bicyclists designation that Fitchburg has. I think we're a silver now city and trying to get up to gold. So, and I know Bike Fitchburg works on that with the current bike committee. So, yeah, I know there's the National Highway Transportation Safety Standards and stuff like they're trying to get that integrated into the bike lanes and things. But so that has something to do with that designation too. Is what your city's rating can be if you, like you said, Andrew, with your traffic counts. If you've got buffered bike lanes and you have so much traffic count or so many people using that road, that's another factor as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Jerry.
And
awesome.
This is Michael. We've seen this before in Public Works. And one of the things, I live out in Quarry Vista, and just kind of chatting with the neighborhood association, we're overly ecstatic for some sort of path, some sort of connectivity, especially to get the kids, from this area and from future development out to the school. I think that would be huge, especially the off-road facilities, and that would be for just kind of the general consensus out that part is that would be more than enough. The on-street bike lanes may be overkill for the connectivity that Quarry Vista is currently looking for.
Yep. Thanks, Michael. And I think I'll be able to pull up that table. I just want to make sure I'm giving you guys the reference. I believe it's in Appendix A. I will stop sharing. See how fast my fingers can move here. Here we go. So we also have some pedestrian like along that. We kind of put the two together, but so screen 2. So you can see here. So we're kind of in these two bubbles for 2-lane roads, 35 miles an hour. If we're under 10,000, we're looking at just the on-street. And granted, having a separate shared use path SUP is kind of on top of that. So that's certainly a more comfortable and could kind of get those interested but concerned and kind of like children riders and that sort of other groups outside of kind of the more confident riders on the shared use path. But yeah, once we go over the 10,000, this bike plan recommends that we have both, again, to cater to those different users. And either that's, and in this case, 6-foot bike lane plus 2-foot buffer versus a 4-foot bike lane with 2-foot buffer. But we can get into that a little bit more, but I just want to kind of give everybody the reference of table 1A and A1 and A2 in the appendix. All right, with that, I'll move on over to Sahin. Okay. Yeah, so this meeting was on February 25th, and we are still kind of processing we did a public survey, and we got all the results in, and kind of the last results were coming in today. So we haven't post-processed all of those yet, but we do have some initial findings that I'll kind of walk through for you guys. So, real fast, this is kind of the project goals. This is the area and kind of the location. So we are kind of going past Lacey a little bit down to Aurora. We're going past kind of the McCoy intersection, kind of just into the trail, but not including the trail. So we're not necessarily scoping in any trail relocation as part of this project. That wasn't included in the original project cost. We are continuing, through Lacey to some degree. And this is kind of an extreme version that would get all the way kind of past that subdivision. Certainly, there's some kind of regrading and realignment potential, but we're not really carrying that through to the intersection. And then we are considering doing some rail improvements down here at Lacey and Sahin, potentially with the associated signal, but some sort of preemption and a bike path on the south side. And then also we'll be including some of East Sharrow kind of along the Quick Trip development as well on that south side. And so that kind of gives a high level overview. So in this case, it's an urbanization project. I'm sure you guys are aware. So curb and gutter, I think a little bit of water, so storm sewer, and then intersection control and kind of medianization, street lighting, street trees, those sorts of things. And so I'll say, this is kind of the generalized cross section that our consultant back in 2019, who did a study, kind of the high level planning study of how much traffic can we expect, what's a rough cross section. This is what they came up with. And we've kind of fit that, although in some cases, we don't necessarily need a 16-foot median. Like we want to try to make it sure it's fitting. And, this is kind of like a rough overview of what it could be. And so the consultant team kind of broke up the project into 3 different areas, an A, a B, and a C section. And so you can kind of see the A section, is kind of the less adjacent to properties. Certainly in this section, we'd be talking about, not necessarily having sidewalks on both sides necessarily, or as wide of median. Then we have kind of, the B section in this section, and then also in this section. And then we have a C section where, we have some frontages, some house frontages directly adjacent to Sahin. And then across the street is a historic property at McCoy House. And so I would say the high level overview is, folks have definitely weighed in a lot on A and B, just kind of from some of those elements, but most of the energy has been directed at one block for a corridor cross section C. And I think there's a big misunderstanding kind of about what where the property line was or is, and what property takes would be required. I wasn't confident at the time, and I think that caused a lot of concern and misunderstanding. So I apologize for that. But we have now kind of updated our cross sections in that area and have kind of shown what the tree canopy is and what the right-of-way line is, and really try to specify that so that we can start working from the crosswalk on the east side over. If you guys aren't familiar with that, I can kind of scroll down and give you a little bit of and A and B are definitely, that's the majority of the corridor. That's certainly worth talking about. But just from a level of public input, C has definitely been the most, kind of top of mind for folks. And so just to note, so what we started to do was work from the east crosswalk or the east sidewalk, which is there currently, and kind of try to work west to see what could fit. So in all of our cross sections, it all fits in right of way. There would be no property takes on the west side for the historic property. The big question is, what can we do to try to minimize any tree impacts? And so when I say that, I don't mean necessarily taking them out, but potentially some of these cross sections would land within the drip line, the canopy, the root zone. So we'll be working with our forester and with our historical property consultant to make sure we're minimizing, to the extent possible, any impacts to that property. And we're meeting with folks on the corridor, we're meeting next week to talk with them specifically about what desires they have, and then we'll be lining up some property owners on the east side as well to kind of make sure we have a lot of options here. We want to make sure it's working the best for the people who live there. But I will say, there's a lot of kind of energy directed at that. We still haven't sifted through all the comments, but there's definitely a lot of focus on this block. That has definitely been an early understanding from kind of what we've gotten from the public survey. And so we also have some intersection concepts. So we had this signal alternative at East Sherrill. We also have a roundabout alternative. Folks have been pretty split. I think generally the comments that we've gotten back are, folks like roundabouts for, them keeping traffic moving, but also have a traffic calming effect. But they didn't like roundabouts kind of from a pedestrian bicycle standpoint. They felt like, especially during peak times, that it was harder to get across there, and they wouldn't feel as confident, especially with a quick trip going on in nearby. There's concern, but folks have a lot of different opinions about one or the other, and we're certainly seeing a kind of a divide there. And then what else? We also had some lighting options. By and large, folks did not like the continuous lighting. They liked it to be more either intersection or intersection plus kind of the some kind of like the potential pedestrian crossings. So I would say, generally we're talking about kind of trying to limit lighting on the corridor, both from a kind of light pollution standpoint and from a kind of environmental standpoint. And so that's kind of high level. Yeah, I'll note that there's some sanitary sewer and select locations, water main, stormwater improvements along all the curb and gutter, and that will be kind of fixing some localized flooding issues that we've had. But yeah, next steps, as we mentioned, so we're here, we're talking to you guys. We're also, initially we thought we'd start to get some approval of the concepts. We're not there yet. For A and B, I feel like folks are kind of coalescing on those are generally good options, and there's not too much pushback there. People may not like that there's a redundancy with bike lanes and an off-street and a shared use path. You might not like medians, but I think generally people kind of understand, urbanization, curb and gutter, and we can kind of play with what the medians look like and their widths and some of the other cross-sectional elements. But that C, we really want to work locally with the folks directly adjacent to that corridor. And then also, similar to Lacey, get kind of a broad coalition of folks, an advisory committee made up of folks in Uptown, the East Fitchburg Neighborhood Association, Swan Creek, to understand, so certainly if you have ideas, or if you have, folks that you feel like would be good for that, or if you want to be on that, we'd like to keep it small, but again, try to recreate what we would have in a live public meeting, of that kind of back and forth of here's what, what these things are good for, medians or roundabouts or whatever elements we're talking about, and what kind of good packages they could go with each other. And that would be kind of for the general concepts. We also are talking about McCoy and Sain. That is a complex intersection with a trail crossing right next to it. I didn't really get into that as much, but that control, I think, is very important for this project's success. So I think there's a lot of elements here, and we've only just started, but I just kind of want to make sure you guys are kind of kept up to speed. We are planning, in addition to kind of that smaller group advisory committee, similar to what we did for East Lacey, we are planning an additional public meeting to kind of talk about what we learned from that. So with that, I'll kind of open up to questions.
I have and I'm not sure if you might have mentioned it, but not much. That the intersection of Sain and McCoy and the road that goes across the Nine Springs E-Way been a problematic intersection. And I didn't hear much about what's going to happen there, or if that's going to change. Mm-hmm. And also related to that, is there any thought anytime in the future about rebuilding that road across the E-Way? That's just if you're on a bike or something, that's pretty hazardous route to take.
Yeah, so definitely. I will share my screen. Sorry, I didn't talk about this one. We didn't have concepts yet for this first public meeting, so I kind of hesitated to talk about it too much. But I think the two main options we're looking at here are either roundabout, kind of a three-legged roundabout, or a continuous T intersection. The continuous T would basically just be a regular signal, but the northbound here could just continue going through. They wouldn't have to stop. There's a few examples like that around the region. And I think the biggest questions would be, we have adjacent wetland. What are going to be the impacts to that in either condition? What's the cost impact? And how does that play with kind of the adjacent trail there, and try to make sure we're maximizing visibility and kind of slowing speeds there so that folks, can really see users on that trail. You also mentioned another crossing. I'm not familiar with that.
I was just referring to how Cyan Road goes across Nine Springs E-Way.
Okay.
That stretch of road has got no shoulder. I mean,
yep.
Bike, that's pretty hazardous duty to try to get across there.
Yeah. So, just generally speaking, we do have a repaving project south of Lacey, or like up to our project limits, which is going down through Irish. And then I believe that the North Cyan project, I think that one got kicked out. I'm not sure on the CIP, but that is a future project to the city limits. And so that would definitely be a great time to kind of address that, although there's plenty of environmental considerations.
Is that in the long-term plan anyplace?
I believe that, yeah, North Cyan certainly is from in the CIP. I'm forgetting which year. It might be 2029.
Oh.
Where are the proposed bike lanes going to connect with the Cap City Trail?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so I mean, certainly we haven't started to design this up here, but they wouldn't be continuing past, this intersection. So we would have to start to get them transitioned to the Cap City Trail, because this is really the project limits. We would, we'd carry this out to the kind of functional area of the intersection, but we wouldn't be carrying it further. So I think there's some existing facilities up here. Is that correct? I know further east there are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're further east up to where? Oh man, I'm gonna take you guys on a. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, I think they kind of die out after this project, and then just kind of become paved shoulders. So we aren't planning on connecting to this facility. We'd probably just be connecting back to the Cap City Trail at this intersection.
So if I understand correctly, the proposed bike lanes on Cyan would probably, on Cyan would probably connect at that intersection of McCoy Road and Cyan.
On the north side, yeah. I mean, you could continue on, on the kind of paved shoulder until the bike lanes kind of start back up here. But we're not sorry, I wish I could hand gesture. This kind of section here is not part of this project. So we'll be, definitely considering how we transition them back to Capital City Trail there. And on the south side, I believe we'll just connect into Lacey, those bike lanes, and then kind of leave it at that.
I'm glad you're addressing that McCoy Road Cyan intersection, because if you're biking across the Capital City Trail coming across Cyan Road there, those cars are on top of you in an instant when they come around that turn, especially coming from Cyan Road from the east.
Yep.
You can look and nobody's coming, and you go into that, and then boom, they're around that corner in an instant. So that's, and you may not know, but a retired Madison police officer got killed there several years ago crossing that intersection. So that's definitely good that will somehow to slow people down a little bit when they're making that turn, because there's just not much room between the trail and that intersection. So.
And certainly one thing we'll be also considering, I know there's also a crash last year, early 2020, from vehicles stacking up here and then kind of blocking the visibility of that trail crossing. So certainly something to consider, kind of all in one functional area of that intersection, of kind of how we clear queues and kind of manage visibility. But yeah, sorry I didn't talk too much about that. Well, our design team is working on this, knowing that this is not controversial in terms of we want to spell out those two options, so everybody can kind of weigh those two. So that's definitely where we're working next, and as well as down at Lacey and Sain, knowing that the railroad coordination is going to kind of hold things up, and want to make sure that we're getting on top of that first in terms of what they want to see there for the crossing.
So I just, I want to make sure that when you're planning those bike lanes, that you have a safe way for them to connect. Because think about over on Lacey Road, when they had that bike lane going through there, I mean, it was pretty obvious that, the bike traffic going through, people are going to get hit. There are accidents there all the time. And then after a number of accidents, they put the bridge in. So, I think people come around that curve at 55 miles an hour. So you got to have something in your plan that's a safe method for. Otherwise, I think it's kind of pointless to put in a commuter bike lane there because it's going to be too dangerous.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And just for people watching to clarify, so the timeline has been slowed down based on versus what was originally proposed.
Yeah. So, and I should note that these are two, both of these projects are in two very different stages. So, we have 60% plans for Lacey, although we haven't really gotten a whole lot of feedback on that to date, like until this first public meeting. Whereas this, we haven't even got 30% plans. We don't have any of the layouts really done except for 2 intersections. So yeah, very early on. Yeah, I'll note that, there's a lot more to go into this. Sorry, what was your original question?
Well, I just want to make sure that people that are watching know what the timeline.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
The timeline has kind of been like reset a little bit in terms of we've gotten some feedback. We need to answer some questions. So there needs to be a little bit more time to reevaluate and allow for more public feedback and
exactly. So this one's earlier on, and now we're slowing it down a little bit more, just making sure that we get everybody on the same page before we move forward with an approval of the cross section. Sue. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. Yes, I just circling back to the discussion. I think you mentioned something about statistics of users of buffered bike lanes, and that there isn't really, we don't know in Fitchburg the percent of the biking population that uses lanes like that, and of all the bikers, how many prefer which type of transport? So did I understand that correctly, or is there information somewhere that tells us about, in this climate where we have lots of inclement weather, how many people use the buffered bike lanes or bike lanes alongside auto traffic regularly, for example, for work commutes or weekend exercise, etc.?
Yeah, I don't have specific numbers on that. I know, I referenced some national surveys that kind of, there's 4 types of cyclists, and I kind of roughly talked about them. I can very quickly kind of show what that looks like. Hopefully. So real fast, hopefully this shows up okay. So, just kind of zoom in on this, that, this started in Portland. There we go. This started in Portland, and now it's kind of, the survey has been applied to the 50 largest metro areas. And so this is kind of a holistic idea, but there's kind of these 4 groups of cyclists, folks that just don't want to do it at all, who these facilities are not attractive to whatsoever. The interested but concerns kind of the largest group of folks who, would potentially use a shared use path or something very comfortable, but aren't really comfortable right next to vehicles. And then the strong and fearless and enthused and confident, which kind of fit that smaller demographic, the 12% or so. And that's kind of the high level understanding of kind of the comfort levels of different cyclists. I don't have specific traffic counts on shared use paths versus adjacent on-street bike facilities in the metro area. We're certainly working on that, but I haven't got anything to date. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, yeah, and so that is, again, when you say percent, that's percent of bicyclists, not percent of total population.
That survey was percent of adults.
Of
So the
adults.
37% of no way, no how is, the percent of adults who would not bike, regardless of the facility.
Who would never ride a bicycle regardless of where.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So again, those that have the courage to ride alongside traffic, it's the adults who are thinking of bicycling. That's the percent that would feel confident to be riding alongside traffic versus a multi-use path.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And then is in the Portland study, is that divided out at all, or the 50 metro areas? How many of them are at our latitude versus, I mean, if you compare
Right.
a suburb of Atlanta versus a suburb or
Yeah.
anything in Wisconsin, you might get different numbers?
It's definitely possible. There could be a lot of variation between those 50, and I haven't followed up on that. I'll note that I'm kind of generalizing of like on street versus off street. I would say this is a kind of spectrum that there are folks who in a dense urban network where they have to make a lot of complex decisions. That's really the strong and fearless type of, like, they don't care, they're weaving in and out of traffic, right? If you're trying to use this to decide between a buffered bike lane and a bike lane, I wouldn't necessarily say that we have that level of nuance, right? So I think generally this kind of describes rough shares of the population at a national level. I think we need to do a little bit more data exploration, certainly on this for the different metro areas, and also locally to understand kind of relative usage between those different facilities.
Yeah, and Fitchburg is probably unique in that we have as many buffered bike lanes, or let me start over, unique in our amount of multi-use paths. Not necessarily unique, but providing more of them than a lot of comparable communities do. So the options are there already.
Yeah, exactly. And, honestly, typically the discussion would be, how can we fit in the bare minimum, right? And so we're talking about two, great facilities. It's just a question of, is that worth it to kind of serve that many more users?
Right,
and that's kind of the question for residents.
Right, because looking at sustainability as those elements, and then the environmental concerns as part of sustainability as well, making them all fit together.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Is it possible to run the bike lane along the railroad, or does it got to be on Sayin Road? Because if it was along the railroad, it wouldn't compete with traffic.
Are you talking about the shared use path or the bike lane?
There's a railroad track that goes right nearby.
Yep.
And that's why I was just wondering if it's possible to acquire land so that the bike path goes along right next to the train line, because then I could cut it right across McCoy Road and connect into the east, into the Cap City Trail.
I see. You mean kind of the southern, like to bypass this corridor totally, or kind of the northern section to connect into Cap City?
The northern section to Cap City.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a possibility. I'm not sure exactly. We haven't. That's not really part of the project scope in terms of finding out kind of what that, acquiring that land. We're trying to minimize land acquisition as much as possible as part of this, but from a connection standpoint, that could definitely make sense. So it's definitely something to look at. Because I know that's primarily your concern of how to get on-street bike users to connect to on the north half to other facilities, right? Like
in the safest manner possible.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. We don't want folks, I mean, for the same logic of, not wanting people to jump on and off a facility at its endpoints, you definitely want to be cognizant of how they're going to connect the rest of the network. That's a good point.
Any other questions for Andrew on the Sayin Road project?
I guess I just want to make sure I understood correctly. You said that none of the, nowhere along sections A, B, or C is land is going to have to be acquired from property owners. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say there's nothing definite, but that's definitely our preference. If anything, we might have some temporary land easements for grading, but we're trying, I mean, definitely in the A and B sections, we have a lot more width. I think we're most constrained in that Argus to Nine Bark Central Park corridor, just with the right of way. We do have some sections, for example, the bike path built on DNR land further north across the street from the fire station. So there was an easement there, and so we can kind of work with that. But to the extent, it's going to be unlikely we're going to be talking about acquisition in this project. It's going to be primarily TLEs.
Because I know I was at the listening session. There's a lot of angst about taking land from the historic McCoy farm.
Yep.
Because you put a road that close to the trees, the runoff, the salt, it's going to kill those trees. I don't think we want to be the ones who destroy the historic McCoy tree line.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and to be clear, so that was kind of that cross section C that I misspoke at. We weren't specific enough at the public meeting to say that we have all these cross sections laid out with what the right of way is and what the tree canopy is. So at no point are we talking about fees, taking that land permanently. It's just going to be a question of what are going to be the relative tree impacts to what other cross sectional elements residents along that corridor would like. So that sounds gloom and doom, but we're certainly working with the Gibbs and the folks across the street to work out kind of what fits the best, right, and makes the most from that corridor. Because again, you only get a few opportunities to do this. You want to do it right. But yeah, definitely a lot of effort and energy is going into making sure that we're saving as many of those trees on the historic property as possible. All right. Yeah.
Randy has a question.
Yes, just on road right of way again, is the road right of way pretty consistent all the way from north to south? I mean, is it 60 foot, 66? Do you know offhand, or?
I can, oops, where'd that go? I can show you real fast. I thought it was in our presentation. So yeah, it varies from 66 to 120. I believe that 66 is in, I believe that's in that section, the cross section C. We do have some other exhibits that kind of show that specific per each of these segments, and I can definitely send that to you guys. But yeah, I mean, it does vary across different, depending on how much development has been done adjacent to the roadway.
But nothing less than 66. I mean,
yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay. Or otherwise, there may be some issue. Okay.
Yep. I think, and that's the local road, 66.
Any other questions?
I got a couple. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No worries.
I know at the listening session, a lot of people east of Sain want to be able to cross at Nine Bark so that they can access the multi-use trail. They like to walk their dogs, like to get over into the parks. I think the discussion about whether or not a roundabout wouldn't really allow that because the traffic would continue to, continuously circulate through, and that perhaps a traffic light might be better to, provide a crosswalk and a stoplight for, because there are a lot of people that like to walk their dogs across there. So I guess I just wanted to share my opinion that I think that should probably be a traffic light, not a roundabout. And then I'm also wondering if there's any discussion about maybe some sort of means of slowing down the traffic before it gets to Nine Bark, because right now people come around that bend in Sain at like 45, 50 miles an hour. They hit that crosswalk and they just blow right through. They don't stop for you. They don't slow down. Or if they do, they're slamming on their brakes. So I don't know if like a traffic light at Clayton or, some sort of median at Clayton just so that they're forced to slow down before they get to that point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, certainly. I mean, part of the project is certainly trying to change the character of the street, adding medians, some sort of gateway treatment that we could, let folks know you're going from, McCoy Road. This is transitions. Now there's, houses fronting the roadway that folks need to slow down while they're going through this residential collector. So That's definitely a big element, and I think trying to lower the speed even further from 35, along with some of these, I don't want to promise, like we said in the meeting, we don't want to say what we're
Right,
going down
right.
to, but
Oh, yeah,
that's, I
yeah,
think, a hope
yeah,
to
yeah.
slow speeds generally.
Um,
The signal specifically, I think, is a little bit tricky, both at Clayton specifically, we wouldn't have the volume, but also at 9 Bark Central Park Place. That's kind of why the mini roundabout came up as kind of a, potentially that would help a little bit with congestion and, kind of potentially be a traffic calming feature that folks, through on Syene would have to kind of go around that. We're not warranting a signal as far as I know there based upon any of our, typical warrants with volume. So it'd be hard to fit one in there. And certainly with Clayton, we just don't have the volume there to do that. But we would have a signal up at McCoy, and that would be stopping traffic going southbound or turning from Syene. So I mean that could help, but I don't think the signal is going to really help folks slow down going southbound. It'd be more kind of some of these elements of narrowing and kind of gateway features that would potentially help that. So
yeah, I was just, I'm no engineer. I was just saying that I think there's something has to slow them down before they get there. You know what? The hill blocks the view.
Yep.
So you're coming 55, they're not seeing what's on the other side. So they come up and over, and
Right.
that's when they start hitting the brakes, when they're like, oh crap, now I'm in residential.
Yep.
So I think something has to kind of slow them down before they hit that hill.
Yep. And we are certainly looking at regrading those hills on either side of Argus. There's kind of a bigger hill on the north side, but certainly there's a hill on the south side as well. That, it's certainly part of our project scope to try to look at how we can, improve sightlines along the corridor while not, improving them so much that people feel super comfortable going 55, right? So it's like, tightening it, but in all the right ways, if that makes sense. Yeah, Sue, do you have a question?
Yes, I think I'm familiar with what these definitions are, but you mentioned residential collector street and then gateway, talking about the same street. I didn't think those were the same.
Oh, right.
So can you explain?
Yeah, I didn't mean gateway in terms of the roadway. I meant more, like a neighborhood transition gateway type thing. That you're going from a kind of a different functional class, lower residential, either Syene or McCoy, where there's faster speeds, there's 45. And we really want to make a transition point, with the medians, with some other cross-sectional elements that, street trees, that sort of thing, that folks, curb and gutter, that folks can kind of understand, oh, now I'm in a neighborhood. I guess that's what I mean, that there's a kind of a gateway treatment to that would kind of transition drivers to think that it's not a throughway, it's, a neighborhood street. Well, neighborhood collector, not a local street, right?
Right, so collector street then is something that collects the traffic from various subdivisions and then takes that traffic to other destinations. Do I have that right? Is that what that means?
Yeah, kind of in the hierarchy. Yeah, local, collector, arterial. Yep.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Hi. I've read studies in the past that said that instead of designing the perfect curve or line, I guess, through a curve is if you put a subtle S into it, or people have to make 2 steering corrections, significantly slows down people. And I've noticed that's the effect on East Washington Avenue, where you notice it's East Washington Avenue, when they reconstructed it, they put in all these little S's and turns, so you have to always be correcting and be on alert. So the end result is there's fewer accidents and the traffic moves slower. So I know a traffic engineer wants to get the traffic through that perfect curve and line, but the antithesis of that is to make an imperfect line, and you'll slow people down.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly in kind of the residential case, that would be like a chicane or something like that. That would, purposely kind of misdirect folks that they couldn't, they couldn't go too fast. We're not specifically looking at that here, but we could have some of that kind of with the addition of left turn lanes and kind of different cross-sectional elements along the corridor. But that's not, I mean, it's typically you typically see that sort of treatment done more on a local scale, just to really try to slow speeds. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly definitely great examples around the region where folks have done that on arterials.
Can you speak to the rationale of putting the parking in that section right across from the McCoy farm or the McCoy property?
Yeah, so I was getting kind of up to speed, and I had heard that during the development, folks that had been a request, mainly from a delivery perspective, that maybe it wasn't a parking spot for every residence, but that currently they have some delivery vehicles just stopping on the side of the road just to quickly throw things in, that they're not using the back alley to drop things off. So I think that was kind of where it came from, and we want to be cognizant those folks are very close to the road, and if you had the roadway surface go right up to that sidewalk, that would feel very different. And so I think we're trying to be sensitive to what elements go in there. We have existing utilities. In the developers agreement, we had promised, or there was an agreement to have street trees for every property. And then there's also a desire to have some parking there, or at least for delivery drivers in certain, or a certain percentage of the block. So, it's going to be hard to fit all that in. And so I think that's really where we need to start talking to the local property owners there of what elements need to go where so we can fit everything that we have there. So, I mean, in some of the latest cross sections, we do have that parking lane. We have a bulb out, so we can still construct the ADA ramp there at Argus. And so, that's a consideration to try and make sure we can kind of have enough width there that we can get that ramp. But that also we're adding in the elements that folks will most utilize there. And I think, it's probably going to be some compromise of, some street trees, some parking spaces, keep it as narrow as possible, potentially a narrow median. But, we're also talking about what access we want to have at Argus. Is that a 3/4 access? Is that a right in, right out like it is right now? I think there's kind of all of that at play. And so I don't want to, that's kind of the genesis of it. There was a request kind of, before my time. So I just kind of moved that forward of, I think there's some amenities that we need to consider for the property owners directly impacted by this project, but what those are and kind of what proportion they are and how we fit that all in there, I think we need to work that out.
Anything else on Sain Road before we move on? All right, well, the next agenda item is number 5, report from the department. And back to you again, Andrew, for any other updates that we might have.
Well, so, I mean, you heard of Lacey and Sain. We have some stuff going on there. On the design side, we certainly have a lot of construction stuff going on Fitchburg Road. So tonight, as we speak, they're starting to put in the signals at Green Rock Cross. That'll be, nighttime closures over the next couple of weeks to put in those signals. So we're basically changing over from temp signals to full install signals. And then in the next couple of weeks, we'll be kind of starting to transition. We call it pre-stage E, doing some of the initial work down at McKee, kind of along the corridor, and then we'll be switching over in early April to just the northbound lanes. So those, the northbound lanes will be closed, so just the southbound lanes will carry both northbound and southbound traffic. So that will be a big transition similar to last year when we shut down half the road from Traceway to McKee. So I'll definitely be, updating the website. And so by the next time we talk, that's going to be, we're going to be in the middle of kind of that design or that construction of the northbound lanes. So I think that's the biggest thing. We have plenty of other projects going on, but I think, I don't want to hold you guys up all night. So.
Any other questions for Andrew? If not, agenda item number 6 is the next meeting is April 8th. Andrew, if there's anything that we will need to discuss that meeting or potential agenda items?
I just had one other, I'm a little puzzled. In the discussion earlier, a couple of meetings ago about our options study for Fitchburg Transit, mass transit, public transit, there were going to be 2 public meetings, and this was going to be one of them.
Yep.
And I guess nobody is here from the public. I don't know if, I'm not sure if any of the participants were non-commission members, but it seems like we're not getting much response. I'm just curious about people's thoughts about getting some engagement of the public into this problem of developing an options study, and should we be doing more or something different to find out what people think about that?
Is the survey online already, and do we have?
The survey's not, neither our survey nor the Metro survey. So we're kind of finalizing that still. And that is, I think, another great mechanism to try to get people who might not show up for a meeting but have some time. We've put some flyers out on we did the public meeting notice. We put it on the website, but I think there's still more we can do, especially for next Wednesday. And then if we still don't have folks showing up to that, we have these meeting presentations from Metro, so we can certainly show that, package that up for Fact TV. But I think also, we need the dialogue. Now we have the information, we need the dialogue. And so to the extent that we can just keep this conversation going, we don't have as much of a time crunch as we did when we thought that our costs were going to double. So now, potentially we can continue talking about this into the summer. And certainly it does correspond well with the network redesign, the phase 1 and phase 2 that, I think with Metro doing all that, there's plenty of reason for folks to jump in and kind of get their voices heard on that. So, but I would love to hear more about kind of rideshare and some local options of what people want. So yeah, to your point, I don't think we got too many people tonight, but hopefully we get more people Wednesday. And if not, we can try some other options.
I'm hoping that we'll be able to, the signs did go up on some of the bus stops. I think we could do more. We could put more bus stops. That's a definite thing that we should try in the future. It was just tough this week getting that organized, but hopefully we can make it happen more quickly in the future. And I did send this out on my newsletter and my blog and my social media, and some of the elders shared it. So there was some engagement, but just because people are paying attention doesn't mean they're going to show up. And that's why I think a potentially survey that has a pretty quick, that's pretty quick to complete, maybe even with some sort of small incentive, like a raffle for something for free to one of the people that completes it, might be just give us a little bit more information and maybe some contact information so we can reach out to people and find out what they think. But yeah, I do think it's gonna be challenging to get people that, I guess my priority is making sure that we get people that rely on the system, some of them, to get their feedback. And I think if we might, I would be perfectly willing to stand out at bus stops and talk to people, but obviously that's complicated by the pandemic. And hopefully maybe that will be better this summer, and we can do some person-to-person outreach, which would be my preference in terms of really accessing people that wouldn't necessarily show up to a city meeting, which is another thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have maybe some more voices next week. But it sounds like, Metro's got, maybe sometimes when they come out with some more details, people have, we're asking kind of for their wish list now, pie in the sky things. So maybe this is hard for people to imagine that. I don't know. So when there's more specifics from Metro, there may be some more people that want to comment, but maybe the way it goes. But yeah, it'd be good to get more feedback for sure. So back to the next meeting, Andrew, is there anything that, we would need to discuss at that meeting at this time? Or?
I would anticipate one of our projects would have cross sections ready, either Lacey or Sane, depending upon progress we make with kind of smaller groups. So yeah, that's one of those I would anticipate at the next meeting.
Okay, great, thanks. Anything else for the group? If not, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll move to adjourn.
I move to second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your time tonight, and I hope you all have a great weekend.